All right. Hello and welcome. How are you all? I'm glad to see you here today to celebrate Constitution Day. Thank you for joining us here at TCC Connect for honoring the Constitution, celebrating the bicentennial of Lafayette's historic visit as we celebrate Constitution Day. All right. I am Carrie Zachary. I'm an instructor of history here at the Connect campus. You will see myself along with Professor Kimberly Cox. At the end, she will share a little information and an attendance link. So if you're looking out for that, you'll see it at the end. And then we will host a Q&A for our presenters. Speaking of, here are our presenters. We have Dr. Chloe Northrup, PhD, and Dr. Jason Frowley, PhD. I will introduce both of them at this time and read their bios, and then they will complete the presentation. All right, Dr. Chloe Northrup is a professor of history and department chair for the TCC Connect campus. She received her PhD in history with a minor in art history from the University of North Texas. Her first book, Fashioning Society in 18th Century British Jamaica, was published earlier this year in the Routledge Studies as part of the History of the Americas series. She's currently working with the Leyland Museum in Cleburne, Texas, on an exhibit focusing on Johnson County during World War II of the upcoming 18th 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, and received a Humanities Texas mini grant to help subsidize it. She's currently working on a monograph of material objects surrounding British naval military celebrities, specifically focusing on Admiral George Rodney. So Chloe will present for us in just a second, along with Dr. Jason Frowley. Dr. Jason M. Frowley is a professor of history at Tarrant County College, where he has taught face-to-face, online, and honors courses since 2005. He earned his PhD from Texas Christian University in 2008 after moving to Texas from his native state of Georgia, where he attended Georgia Southern University for both his bachelor's and master's degrees. In 2021, he was the recipient of TCC Chancellor's Award for exemplary teaching. His research focuses on soldier-civilian interactions during the American Civil War, specifically during the Gettysburg Campaign. Outside of work, Dr. Frowley is an amateur musician and an avid gamer, and he most enjoys spending time with his wonderful wife, Jill, and three growing boys, Joshua, Justin, and James. We are so glad they're here to present to us today, and I will hand it right over.
Okay, so I'm trying to take control here, so just give me a moment, please. It says it's waiting for approval. All right, well, I'll wait on approval. I want to welcome everybody to Constitution Day today. So it is September 17th, 2024. And every year, Tarrant County College is going to commemorate Constitution Day, which is September 17th, 1787. It's usually a joint operation between the government department and the history department. And our goal today is really twofold. We're going to, again, commemorate Constitution Day, and we're also going to commemorate the bicentennial visit of the Marquis de Lafayette, which will be handled by Dr. Northrup. So what I'm going to do to start is sort of lay the groundwork, the backdrop for Lafayette's visit. And I'm going to cover this period that you see on the screen here of the early Republic. And one of the reasons it's important for us to do this, I think, is, as you are probably well aware, we are in the throes of a very vitriolic election right now. And it seems like each one gets more vitriolic than the last. And to echo former President Barack Obama, there's a famous political commercial that was made in regards to some things I'll be talking about today. And Barack Obama makes a comment in there that it seems like a return to civility isn't possible, right? And so this idea, it's a common misconception that, back in the good old days when politicians were nice to each other and got along, can't we go back to that? And I'm kind of here to wreck that a little bit. American politics has always been a rather vicious sport, if you will. There are times when it is more civil. That we can certainly point to certain elections that were very civil. But if you look back to the period that we'll be talking about today, the first 25 to 30 years of America's history, it doesn't look that dissimilar to what we see in our modern election cycles. We've had recently some assassination attempts on one of our candidates. We've a couple of years ago had a riot at the Capitol. Well, we're going to see some things that may be on a similar footing in some of the elections that are going to happen in today's talk. And so again, this is just a little roadmap here of the period that I'll be talking about. Let's see if I have control now. Oh, there we go. All right. So again, the Constitutional Convention, or initially called the Philadelphia Convention, was held in the summer of 1787 between May and September. And it formally ended on September 17th, 1787, which is what we celebrate as Constitution Day. So just to address one misconception right off the bat, Constitution Day is not the day the Constitution was ratified or the day it went into effect. Rather, it is the day that the convention ended, and the 39 men who signed it, 55 delegates were at the convention, but only 39 signed it. There's a little hint of some issue there. But 39 men signed it on September 17th, 1787, releasing it to the public, releasing it to the American people, releasing it to the states to review and to discuss ratification. And we, in the modern era, may take our Constitution for granted. We may take our nation for granted. Some do. Again, maybe in light of some of the vitriol we've seen spewed, maybe some don't. But I think more than don't, sort of take it for granted. We have the oldest active constitutional republic in the world, and so we may take it for granted. But it's worth pointing out that the founders did not take it for granted. And as I mentioned, only 39 of the 55 delegates signed on to it. The other 16 that didn't sign for a variety of reasons. Some left to go home to take care of ill family members, or went home to take care of their businesses. But there were a fair number who didn't sign in protest. They disagreed with the new Constitution. They thought it made the federal government too powerful. They were concerned that the president, this new concept of a president, was too much like a king. They disagreed with the taxation powers of the federal government. They thought the state governments were going to be usurped. Many of them wanted to see a Bill of Rights. They understood that the Constitution had enumerated powers, a list of powers of what the federal government could do. But some of these folks wanted a list of things that the government couldn't do, which we ultimately are going to call our Bill of Rights. So again, there was a protest, if you will, right off the bat. And the following day, even September 18th, 1787, one of the members of the convention, the oldest member, Benjamin Franklin, who was, I believe, 81 years old at the convention, the following day, he was visiting the mayor of Philadelphia's house, and he was having a conversation with the First Lady of Philadelphia, Elizabeth Powell, at the Powell House. And another convention member actually recorded this in his journal, which is how we know the conversation took place. But Elizabeth asked Benjamin Franklin, what kind of government have you given us? What have we got, a republic or a monarchy? And Benjamin Franklin's famous response to her was, a republic, if you can keep it, right? And that closing line, that if you can keep it. Oh, there we go. Okay, all right. So Dr. Northrup lets us know Barry Manilow. So I think Barry Manilow, if you know who that is. Anyway, so this concept of if you can keep it, is this going to last? If you recall from maybe your U.S. History Survey courses, when the convention members were holding this meeting in Philadelphia, their original intent was to, quote unquote, remedy the defects of the Articles of Confederation. Right, but they've created a new document, right? They've created this Constitution, and they do set up within the Articles of the Constitution. Article 7 stipulates how will this new Constitution become the law of the land? How will it replace the Articles of Confederation? Because again, there's no guarantee that it will. So a republic, madam, if you can keep it. Oh, let's see here. There we go. It may go twice here. Sorry, guys. So the first big controversy, if you will, is the ratification debates, right? So we have to decide, is this going to be the new law of the land? And Article 7 stipulates that 9 of the 13 states must ratify this new Constitution if it is to replace the old Articles of Confederation. And right away, even before the first state ever ratifies, the first state being Delaware, excuse me, is the first state to ratify. But even before that, we're going to see the three men on the left side of the screen are going to write a series of begin writing a series of essays, 85 total, in which they explain and defend the Constitution of the United States to try and convince the necessary states to ratify. Again, they need 9 of 13, but with something like the Constitution, unanimity would be nice, right? It would be nice if all 13 states would get on board with this. And so you're going to have James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, many of whom I'm sure you've heard of. James Madison, future president, father of the Constitution. Alexander Hamilton, future Secretary of the Treasury, future, musical star, I guess. John Jay, first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So they're going to write these essays that, again, explain and defend the Constitution. In fact, back in I believe it was the 2012 election, if memory serves, I remember watching CBS Evening News, and Katie Couric was the anchor, and she asked every candidate, if you could take one book with you to the White House other than the Bible, what book would that be? And almost all the candidates said the Federalist Papers. So they're very important documents that help us in understanding this Constitution. But again, not everybody agreed. It wasn't a foregone conclusion. It wasn't unanimous initially. And so we also see anti-federalists, who some of whom attended the Constitutional Convention, like Patrick Henry, for example. And so you have men like Patrick Henry, future President James Monroe, future Vice President George Clinton, and many others who oppose this new Constitution. They're concerned that it skews too much in the direction of oppression. They're concerned that, again, the president's too much like a king and that it takes away too much state power. And again, they write their own essays, not as many as the Federalist Papers, but the Anti-Federalists are going to write their own essays, sort of having this debate of, should this even be our new governing document? Now, as of June 21st, 1788, New Hampshire is going to be the 9th state to ratify, and so the Constitution is formally ratified on June 21st, 1788. And we're going to see the first meeting of Congress in March of 1789. We're going to have our first president elected, in George Washington. But there were still 4 holdout states: New York, Virginia, North Carolina, and Rhode Island. Now, New York and Virginia will come on pretty quick. Within a month, they'll also ratify. But North Carolina is going to hold out for 9 months, and Rhode Island is going to hold out for almost 2 years before they are the final state to ratify, to make it formally unanimous. So again, wasn't a foregone conclusion that this was going to work out at all. Now, once we have our first presidential administration, things are going to continue to heat up between factions, right? Federalists and Anti-Federalists were 2 factions in a debate, but we're going to see things continue to heat up in the creation of our first American party system, which is the Federalists versus the Democratic Republicans. And this is something that the Constitution and the founders had not fully anticipated. Many of them expressed concerns about the creation of political parties, including James Madison, including George Washington, but it's going to happen nonetheless. And it's going to happen within George Washington's cabinet. 2 of his most powerful cabinet members, his Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, and his Secretary of Foreign Affairs, which today we call the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, they're going to have vehement disagreements about what America is, what America should look like, what the future of America should be. On the Hamiltonian side, they tend to be pro-bank, pro-tariff, pro-manufacturing, and pro-British when it comes to foreign policy. Whereas on the Jeffersonian side, they tend to be anti-bank, anti-tariff, they tend to be pro-farmer, and they tend to be pro-French when it comes to foreign policy. And of course, there's always exceptions, but by and large, these 2 groups start to form around Hamilton and Jefferson. Those who side with Hamilton's vision of America call themselves the Federalist Party. Those who side with Jefferson's vision of America call themselves the Democratic Republican Party. And while there are these specific issues we could look at, banks, tariffs, taxes, foreign policy issues, et cetera, one of the core issues that this boils down to is constitutional interpretation. So again, if you sit around today growing tired of listening to political pundits argue about what the Constitution means and how it should be interpreted, don't lose heart, because the people who wrote it had the same disagreements, right? This is not agree on how the Constitution should be interpreted. Those who sided with Hamilton, the Federalists, they tended to be, again, always exceptions, but they tended to be what we would call loose constructionists, meaning that they believe that, yes, there are enumerated listed powers within the Constitution, but there are also implied powers in things like the necessary and proper clause, that you could read between the lines on certain issues and imply certain things. Whereas on the Jeffersonian side, the Democratic Republican side, they tended to be strict constructionists. They tended to say, hey, look, the enumerated powers are there, and that's all that's there. You can't make it say things that it doesn't say. And the best example of that is probably the bank, right? Hamilton argues in favor of a bank, but there's nothing in the Constitution about a bank. So the Jeffersonians are like, well, it doesn't say you can have a bank in the Constitution, so you shouldn't be able to have one. And Hamilton argues that it's implied by the necessary and proper clause. So again, you have these debates raging over constitutional interpretation and what is America's base setting? Like, what are we going to be? And as these things are heating up, seeing questions, and I'm trying to, there's chat. Let me see if I can, that's the Barry Manilow thing. Right. Okay. So as things are heating up, George Washington is going to go through his 2 terms in office. He could run a 3rd term. The 22nd Amendment doesn't exist yet, so there's nothing prohibiting him from serving additional terms. So, but he's going to choose not to run for a 3rd term. He doesn't, the way I often present this in class is, he doesn't want to die in office, because the people who tend to die in office, those are kings, and he doesn't want to appear as a king. I'm not suggesting he foresaw his death, but it is worth pointing out that had he run for a 3rd term and served it, if things played out, he died in 1799, so he would have died in office, I guess. But he doesn't seek a 3rd term. But he does try to lower the temperature in the room, if you will, as the vitriol is being spewed between Federalists and anti-Federalists, and then later between the Federalists and the Democratic Republican parties. He tries to lower the temperature in the room. He publishes a farewell address in a Philadelphia newspaper in 1796, in which he calls for 3 things. He calls for nationalism. He wants to see Americans identifying more as Americans and less by their sections, by being Southern or Northern or a New Englander or Virginian or what have you. He wants to see Americans first identifying as Americans. That should resonate with some Texans. He also calls for nonpartisanship. He sees the vitriol being spewed between these 2 political parties that grew out of his cabinet, and he wants to see that tempered down. He's concerned about the growth of these political parties and how that is a threat to this young republic. And he calls for neutrality in the current issues going on over in Europe, specifically with the French Revolution and the French Revolutionary Wars. So again, he's trying to temper things. He's trying to bring the temperature down in the room. Unfortunately, it doesn't work, because it seems like I have to reset this every time. I'm sorry. It's not letting me go to the next slide. Zachary, are you able to change it by chance? It's like, there we go. Thank you. Sorry, it wouldn't let me do it. So after Washington is going to step aside, we're going to have our first truly contested elections in American history. And Washington won twice in 1788 and 1792, but he won unanimously. And so 1796 is really our first truly contested election. It will be followed by another contested election in 1800. And when I was at TCU, one of the retired professors who used to walk the halls up there was Professor Paul Bowler. And he's a historian of presidential campaigns. And he declared in one of his books that the elections of 1796 and 1800 were exuberantly venomous, right? These were very ugly elections between these 2 parties. We have Vice President John Adams, right? George Washington's vice president. He's going to run as the Federalist candidate. And we have the Democratic Republicans nominating the former Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson. And despite Washington's farewell address and his call to temper the vitriol, these are very vitriolic elections. In 1796, you're going to have supporters of Thomas Jefferson accusing John Adams of wanting to restore monarchy in America. And you're going to have supporters of John Adams accusing Jefferson supporters of being cutthroats who live in rags and sleep amidst vermin, right? And this, to draw a word from more recent elections, referring to them almost as deplorables, right? They're country bumpkins. And so you've got vitriol being spewed, and it's only going to get worse in 1800, because in 1796, John Adams is going to win the presidency. But again, because the Constitution had not anticipated the development of these political parties, the way the Electoral College worked in that time period was the electors each cast 2 votes for president, and then whoever came in first place with a majority became president, and the runner-up became vice president. And so in this election, 1796, John Adams is going to win the majority and become the president, but the runner-up, his vice president, is going to be Thomas Jefferson. So again, to draw a modern parallel, imagine if Donald Trump was Joe Biden's vice president, or imagine that Hillary Clinton had been Donald Trump's vice president, right? How awkward that would be. And so we have this situation where we have a president and a vice president that are from different parties. And there's going to be another big constitutional controversy during Adams's presidency. We almost go to war with France. In the build up to this possible war with France, the Adams administration is going to pass the Alien and Sedition Acts, the most controversial of which was the Sedition Act, which made it illegal to say or to publish false, scandalous, or malicious writing against the federal government, which in the eyes of many was a clear violation of the First Amendment, which stipulates that Congress shall make no law abridging your freedom of speech. Well, Congress did it, and I think it's like 25 or 26 men were actually prosecuted under the Sedition Act, and they were predominantly pro-Jefferson newspaper editors, including the grandson of Benjamin Franklin. And so the question arose, well, if that law is unconstitutional, how do we strike it down? Today we would say, well, the Supreme Court has judicial review, and they could strike it down through the process of judicial review. But the concept of judicial review had not yet been established, right? That's not established until 1803 in a case called Marbury versus Madison. So here we are in 1798 with the Sedition Act. You've got Thomas Jefferson, the vice president, his political ally, James Madison, who just finished up serving as a representative from Virginia. Both of them think that this law is unconstitutional. How do we strike it down? And they're going to make arguments. They're going to write separate resolutions called the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, and they're going to argue that states should have the right to, in the case of Jefferson, to nullify federal law, or in the case of Madison, to interpose between the state and the federal government with regards to these laws. The concept of interposition. But regardless of which term you use, it's the idea that states should have the right to review federal laws to determine whether or not they are constitutional. And so that's a big constitutional crisis. Do states have that authority? Should states have that authority? Fortunately, it gets tempered here because we don't end up going to war with France. The Sedition Act expires in 1800, and it's not really tested. But the crisis of nullification, this concept, will be back in the 1830s. And it's been mentioned recently. I recall not too long ago when the Affordable Care Act was passed under Barack Obama's presidency, and I recall Nikki Haley of South Carolina giving a speech where she said that South Carolina would attempt to nullify that law. So this concept of nullification still pops up even in the modern era. And should states have that level of authority? So we get to the election of 1800, and like I said, it gets even uglier. Once again, it's John Adams versus Thomas Jefferson. And language continues to be ugly. The Jeffersonians are accusing Adams of, again, trying to marry off his son to a daughter of King George III so he can restore monarchy in America, of sending one of his political allies to get mistresses from Russia. On the other side, you've got the Adams supporters accusing Jefferson, or at least saying that if Jefferson were to win, murder, rape, incest, adultery, robbery will be openly taught and practiced. The soil will be soaked with blood. These are all quotes from Federalist newspapers. So again, it was a very, very ugly election. And it gets even uglier because when the results come in the 1800 election, neither side nobody is victorious. Nobody gets a majority of the Electoral College. In fact, there's a tie. But it's not between Jefferson and Adams. It's between Jefferson and his air quotes running mate, Aaron Burr. Now, I'll say air quotes because the concept of a running mate wasn't exactly established just yet. But he was a Democratic Republican that was running alongside Jefferson, and they had kind of an idea that he would be the vice president. He would come in second, if you will. But they tied. Their plan didn't work out, and they ended up tying. Well, when there's a tie, when nobody wins a majority, the election gets thrown into the House of Representatives. And when it gets thrown into the House, the Federalists in the House see an opportunity to embarrass Thomas Jefferson, and they try to choose Aaron Burr. Whereas the Democratic Republicans, they side with Thomas Jefferson. And the House of Representatives has 35 separate votes, and nobody wins. The question becoming, are we ever going to have a president or what? Fortunately, on the 36th vote, Thomas Jefferson's old nemesis, Alexander Hamilton, Mr. Federalist, convinces some of his fellow Federalists to abstain or to support Jefferson so that he wins. Because even though Hamilton and Jefferson disagree on a lot of political issues, there is somebody that Hamilton dislikes even more than Jefferson, and that is Aaron Burr. We don't have time to go into why, but there's a history there, and Aaron Burr to him is an evil person. So he's gonna support Jefferson. So Jefferson's going to get elected president, and Burr is going to become the vice president. And again, we don't have time for the full story, but suffice to say, we're going to see as a result of this our first act of political violence in American political history. Burr and Hamilton are going to continue to butt heads in 1804 because Burr is going to try to get elected the governor of New York. Hamilton blocks that. And so on July 11th, 1804, Aaron Burr, who is still the sitting vice president of the United States at that time, is going to shoot and kill Alexander Hamilton, the former Secretary of the Treasury, in a duel in Weehawken, New Jersey. So again, political violence occurring here in this early republic. So much for this concept of a return to civility. Can you go to the next slide for me, please? It's still not working out. Okay, so I'm not going to cover in detail the presidencies of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, but suffice to say the next 4 terms in office are going to be dominated by the Democratic Republicans, with Thomas Jefferson serving 2 terms, James Madison serving 2 terms. There are ample controversies we could discuss. The Louisiana Purchase, the First Barbary War, the Embargo Act, the War of 1812. All of these are controversies, but it all gets summed up for us here in 1815, 1816, with the death of the Federalist Party. So as the War of 1812, which is a war between the United States and Great Britain, is carrying on, the Federalists, who tend to be pro-British, are growing weary of the war. And in December of 1814, they're going to call a meeting in Hartford, Connecticut. And they're going to meet into January of 1815. And they're going to come up with a list of demands. They want some constitutional amendments added to the Constitution. They want some amendments that will, for example, end what they call the Virginia dynasty. They're tired of all these Virginians being president. So they want an amendment that'll limit presidents to 1 term, and that will require each successive president to be from a different state. They also want amendments that will make it harder to declare war, harder to institute trade embargoes. They want an amendment that will overturn the 3/5 compromise, which allowed Southern states to count their slaves as people, as 3/5 of a person for the purpose of representation. And so they have this big list of demands that they want to see enacted. And they show up in Washington in early to mid-January with this list of demands, right about the same time that news is coming into Washington about a big military victory won by Andrew Jackson down at New Orleans. And also news of the Treaty of Ghent, which was signed in December of 1814, that formally ends the War of 1812. And so many Americans are celebrating the end of the war. Many of them are celebrating it as a victory, though one could argue it was more of a draw, but they're celebrating it as a victory. And here come the Hartford Convention members, these Federalists, with this list of demands. And the question becomes, or what? Like, what if we don't give you these things? And the rumors swirl. There's no actual hard evidence of this, but the rumors begin to swirl that some members of the Hartford Convention threatened, if we don't get these things, we will secede. And we being New England, right? The federal space of power was New England. Now, did they ever really threaten secession? Again, we don't have hard evidence of that, but their meeting was behind closed doors. The rumors swirl and people latch onto it. And so the Federalists come off looking disloyal and unpatriotic, and they are demonized, as you see in this political cartoon from 1816. You see the Hartford candidate, that's the Federalist, is a devil running. And so 1816 is going to be the last time that the Federalists nominate a candidate for president. His name is Rufus King, and he's going to lose. And after that, the Federalists they'll maintain some local political power in New England up through the mid 1820s, but the Federalist Party is pretty much dead. And so 1816. Next slide, please. So 1816, we're going to have a presidential election. It's going to be that Federalist candidate I mentioned. His name's Rufus King. And he's going to run against James Monroe, who has, if you remember from the earlier slide, he was an anti-Federalist, right? He was one of those people that was initially opposed to the Constitution. But he's going to run as the Democratic Republican candidate. He is going to win. And he's going to serve 2 terms as well, another Virginian. So much for the Federalist hopes of ending the Virginia dynasty. And his presidency coincides with something called the era of good feelings. And it's this attitude that, we've just won the War of 1812, though more of a draw, but celebrated as a victory. That it looks like George Washington's call is coming true. His farewell address is coming true, right? There's a growing sense of nationalism, new infrastructure, new roads, new canals, new manufacturing. Again, a victory in a war, at least maybe a victory, something that looks like a victory. There's only one political party, right? The Federalists are defunct, so there's only the Democratic Republicans, so maybe nonpartisanship is coming true, right? You can't be partisan if there's only one party, can you? Spoiler, you can. Just look at our modern political parties. You can have factions within a party. But on the surface, it feels like this era of good feelings. But there are significant cracks in the foundation, right? There are major problems in the foundation. Slavery is revitalized during this period. We're going to have another contest between state and federal governments, with a Supreme Court case called McCulloch versus Maryland, where a federal entity is allowed to tax state property. We're going to have an economic panic of 1819, so an economic catastrophe. We're going to have the biggest. I didn't mention we're going to have a new bank, right? The bank that had been so controversial the first time around is going to be equally controversial this time around. And then the biggest controversy of all is going to be what's called the Missouri Compromise of 1820. And so we've, under Jefferson, we had purchased the Louisiana Territory. We're now going to start to see states carved out of that territory. And the question becomes, what is America's idle setting? Do we actually believe in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal, or don't we? Are we going to allow states carved out of the Louisiana Territory to be slave states, or must they be free states? Right. So Missouri is going to come in as a slave state, and they're going to draw a line at 36 degrees, 30 minutes latitude and declare that any states carved out of the Louisiana Purchase from north of that line, with the exception of Missouri, must be free states. If they are carved south of that line, they can be slave states. And this was a major controversy that impacted Thomas Jefferson, who was 77 years old at the time. And he's going to write a letter to a congressman from Massachusetts. And he's going to tell this congressman that basically the Missouri Compromise awakened to me like a fire bell in the night. It was like a fire alarm going off. It signaled to me, just paraphrasing him here, signaled to me the end of the Union, the knell of the Union. And, he just thinks that, there are lines that you could point to between freedom and slavery. Like you could point to the Mason-Dixon line, but that line wasn't designed to be a line between freedom and slavery. It became that. The Ohio River was not designed to be a line between freedom and slavery, though it became that. But the Missouri Compromise line is a line drawn by man that he argues is just going to get deeper and deeper. Every time that this is put before politicians, and every time that there's an irritation between the sections, that line is going to get deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's going to spell the knell of the Union. And he closes the letter by basically saying, I'm just happy that I'm not going to live long enough to see it all fall apart, that I won't have to shed any tears over it. So again, it may seem like the era of good feelings, but there are big cracks in the foundation. And last slide for me, please. And so as the Marquis de Lafayette is coming to visit with America, he is going to be here at the same time as one of the most controversial and consequential elections in American history, and that is the election of 1824. Again, there's only one party, but you're going to have 5 men throw their, actually more than this, but these 5 men are going to throw their hat in the ring. The man in the middle, John C. Calhoun, will withdraw. He will get nominated as the vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Republicans, but that means whoever wins, Adams, Clay, Crawford, or Jackson, whoever wins is going to have Calhoun as their vice president. But when you're left with the 4 men on the perimeter here, the ones on the left, Adams and Clay, they think like old Federalists. They're all Democratic Republicans, but they're pro-bank, they're pro-tariff, they're pro-manufacturing, whereas the people on the right, Jackson and Crawford, they are more like the old-style Democratic Republicans. There are, of course, exceptions to all this, but they tend to be, anti-bank, anti-tariff, pro-farmer, etc. Well, when the results come in this election, because you have 4 candidates in the field, it makes it almost impossible for anybody to get a majority. Jackson wins more of the popular vote and more of the Electoral College than anyone, but he doesn't get enough to win the election. He feels that he is the rightful winner, but the election gets thrown into the House, same as we saw in 1800. And when the House votes, they choose John Quincy Adams. And they choose him largely with the support of the man at the bottom left, Henry Clay, who is not eligible because he came in 4th. So they can only choose between Jackson, Crawford, and Adams in this vote. The House can, so they can't even choose Clay. Clay was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, so he's going to throw his support behind John Quincy Adams. Adams is going to win. After Adams becomes president, he makes Henry Clay Secretary of State, which back then was generally a symbol that you were likely going to be the next president. Andrew Jackson will cry foul and declare that a corrupt bargain was struck. He'll declare Henry Clay as a Judas of the West, and declare that this was a corrupt bargain campaign, that the election was stolen from him, and he will start campaigning right away so that he can defeat John Quincy Adams in the election of 1828, where we see the rise of our second American party system, the Jacksonian Democrats under Andrew Jackson and the National Republicans under John Quincy Adams. So again, very divisive time in America, and that lays the groundwork for Lafayette's visit and Dr. Chloe Northrup.
Hello, how is it going, everybody? Thank you so much for laying down the groundwork for our 1824 visit. As you see, it's an incredibly contentious election, and I think, again, like we've said, it's not unlike things that we are experiencing now. So it's kind of, even though this is a really, like we said, contentious time, this is kind of a very lovely story. And it's one that shows a really important bond that I think sometimes is overlooked in many ways between the United States and France, and between our greatest ally from France, the Marquis de Lafayette. Many of you might know, Carrie, I'm trying to take control. And I keep requesting. So many of you might know him from the musical Hamilton, and I saw some questions in the Q&A about Hamilton, and I'd be happy to chat with you about that. I love talking about the musical Hamilton, and I would go on with that forever. So we'll wait till the end. So as you see, you might know and love him from played originally by Daveed Diggs here in Hamilton. And I kind of thought it was funny that you see these two images here that I thought they were kind of actually strikingly similar. So it shows this enduring bond then between the United States and one of our greatest allies of all time, and that's the Marquis de Lafayette. So Lafayette's visit in 1824 is a reunion trip in many ways, but it's not just that. It shows the ideals of our nation, and it's an occasion that also rekindled the spirit of the American Revolution. And that's a really beautiful thing because in 1824, they were getting close to that 50th anniversary of the American Revolution. And so this gave people a moment to not only think about this ally coming home and this kind of homecoming reunion tour, if you will, but also for us to think about the legacy of the American Revolution. You know, as we said, even though there's kind of one party, if you will, there's a lot of divisions, and this is something that everyone could come together and agree on. And I want us to think about a few things as we're thinking about Lafayette. Is there a figure nowadays that if you talk to people on any side of the political divide could come together and agree on? And I went to dinner this weekend with a group of friends, and I actually asked the table, you know, as one does, and the table said no, they did not think so. But I would love to know in the Q&A if anybody feels like there's somebody who crosses this divide between, and this could be like a celebrity, this could be anybody that crosses this divide that everyone can agree on, like, we love this person and we will all come and shake hands when it comes to this person here. And is this a relic of the past from 1824? And so this is going to rekindle the spirit of the American Revolution and celebrate the spirit, I would say, of our Constitution Day here today. And so this is going to cause people to come together and think about things like legacy, about how we remember certain events. And the objects that are created are a really beautiful reminder then of this trip now that we're coming on that bicentennial. So when the Marquis de Lafayette disembarked in August 1824 in Manhattan, he is visibly moved by this crowd that gathers in New York. He's 66 years old at this time, so he's not a young man. And think about all the he fought for years. He spent winter in Valley Forge. These are really tough things that he lived through as well. So he's not a young man at 66, and they greeted him. They greeted him in New York, and he's visibly moved by this. He's shedding tears coming down, and he greets these men who had donned on the uniform from the American Revolution once again. And I mean, like, again, at maybe even almost 50 years old, they had seen better days. And I mean, even at the time, they probably weren't like the most lovely things to begin with, but dusting off that old uniform to wear to come and shake the hand of the Marquis de Lafayette, it's a really like moving thing. Lafayette walked with a cane onto American soil once again, and he stopped in New York as his first stop in this beginning of a 13-month tour that would take him through all 24 states in this young country. Next slide. He is no stranger to the American people. Lafayette was born in 1757 in France, and he was a nobleman deeply influenced by ideals of the Enlightenment growing up. He was orphaned at a young age. First, his father died when he was very, very young, and then his mother died a few years when he was a little older. And so he inherited a vast fortune, very rich young man, and he is raised. Can we go to the next slide? Sorry, I can't take. Oh, do I have control now? Can I just? I can. Yay. Okay, thank you. I can do this. So, despite his privileged upbringing, he has a really strong sense of duty. He wants to be a fighter. He wants to be a warrior. His father had fought. His grandfather, going all back on his paternal side, had all been military minded, and he wanted this as well. There's a story of this like wolf dog thing that was roaming around the countryside when he was little, and him and his friends would go out trying to look for it. And he said like his heart was just filled with his passion to be the one to find this beast that was, you know, stalking the countryside, and he wanted this as a child. And I think that kind of shows that he wanted this excitement. He kind of wanted some danger too. And so at 19, when the American Revolution begins, this is his chance, right? This is his chance. Yeah, unfortunately for him, France was not involved in any war, so he can't go out and achieve military glory through France. So we needed other avenues. he married another noblewoman, Adrienne de Noailles, and she's from a very prominent French family. And he is going to, at one point, that they kind of get him this job, it being some kind of lackey for one of the King Louis's brothers, and he didn't like it at all. He said he didn't mind being disagreeable in order to keep his independence. And so he's kind of like a little bit of a renegade. And so he wants to go fight. Everyone says no. So he like sneaks away, buys a ship, and comes over to America, leaving his pregnant wife in Paris. And so, the apology letters, it's really lovely. Like, I can't help myself. I've got to go. It's my destiny kind of thing. And, maybe it was. She forgives him. Everything's fine with them. So no worries about that. But it shows his enthusiasm for the cause. And so he comes and, offers his service to Washington. There's like these famous, and then maybe anachronistic or maybe even not true. If he like comes, he's like, Washington, I am here. Here I am. And so he becomes a major general in the Continental Army. And this is the start of a really beautiful relationship then between him and Washington. There's going to be times during the American Revolution where it's even questioned if Washington is going to continue as the leader of the Continental Army. And he always stays incredibly loyal to Washington, and Washington will stay loyal to him. And so he is going to serve with distinction. He actually gets wounded in Brandywine. He gets a leg wound. And later, by the way, when he's like walking with the cane, and people think it's from that old wound at Brandywine, but it was from something else later on, but he never corrects people and like why. I mean, like it's a great thing. Everyone's like, oh, wounded at Brandywine. So anyways, he is also going to lead troops at the Siege of Yorktown, which effectively ends up, so I kind of skip ahead in the war here, it effectively ends the war militarily for America on land. By the way, not on sea, which is something I'm studying now. If you want to talk more about like battles after Yorktown, the American Revolution, I'd be happy to chat with you about that for a very, very long time, much further. So that's kind of the end of his experience during the American Revolution. He then goes back to France as a celebrated hero, and he is going to try to bring kind of this political movement to France, which is the monarchy, right? So this is going to, he ends up being the commander of the National Guard during the Revolution. But as it radicalized, remember, he's a nobleman, so he finds himself at odds with the more extreme factions. He's more moderate and trying to balance kind of these different factions that are going on. He ends up getting trying to flee, and on his way to Austria he gets arrested, and he is going to end up I would say close to being guillotined. His wife's family, many of them are guillotined during this reign of terror. But through the work of people like James Monroe and others who are going to be in France that are American ambassadors and stuff, they write tons and tons of letters, and they know don't hurt the Marquis de Lafayette, right? And so he is going to then be released and kind of live in relative political obscurity during the Napoleonic era. He didn't really want to serve under Napoleon and this kind of authoritarian regime in his view. And so he is going to stay committed to, he says, liberty and democracy. And with the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy, he's going to re-enter public life, advocating for constitutional reforms. He is going to have lost some elections and stuff. So it's not like he had like a really flourishing thing going on in France either. He had also, his finances had been very decimated by the revolution as well. And before, remember, he like bought his own ship to come to America. Now he's in really like reduced circumstances. He's actually wondering with his kids, like, how will he like afford like granddaughters' dowries and stuff? Like he's not the very wealthy man he was before. Then he comes to America. He's invited for this kind of 50th anniversary, almost kind of tour, then in 1824. And this is a grand tour, a triumphant journey. And he actually, I think, gets to see then the fruits of the labor that he had done during the Revolution. And so, like I said, this 13-month tour is extraordinary, going through all 24 states. And I'm going to say, like, for me now to drive through that many states, that's a lot for us now. So if we can imagine back, this is before highways and before really great roads. And he goes by carriage, by boat, by everything to go and see all this. And it's going to be this testimony. Everywhere he goes, he is greeted with these grand celebrations, parades and banquets. Cities and towns will be decorated with banners. It's hard for them to go and make any like pace because every little town they go to, people are gathered on the streets with banners to see him. And it's a really, I would say, like, beautiful thing. It's a very American thing to come out and want to show somebody how much you appreciate them and want to get a glance of them and want to be able to interact with them. And so he is going to be accompanied by his son, George Washington Lafayette, and his secretary and his valet. So there's four of these guys kind of going through on this tour. Now, his son had spent time in America. I believe he like went to Harvard or something, or one of the universities. He actually lived in Mount Vernon for a while with Washington. So he had experienced America already. And so they are going to go and stop at all these little towns along the way. And they're met with people dressed in their finery, and the cannons go off every time they go through a town. And everyone again will dust off those old revolutionary uniforms to wear to show him. And I'm wondering, I think about like people like maybe gaining a little weight, you can't quite button it anymore. It's a really sweet like thought. Hopefully they hadn't gotten like more thin. But anyways, yes. So he does a lot of really important things on this tour. And like I mentioned, this is a time for Americans to think about how they are going to honor the American Revolution themselves. And so they are starting to think about these sites like Bunker Hill. This is the site of a famous battle. Not that Marquis Lafayette participated in it at all, but him going and visiting this spot made it a renewed hallowed ground for individuals to see this is an important spot. Maybe we shouldn't build houses or whatever it is all over it. Maybe we need to preserve this for posterity because this is an important spot, not only because of the battle, but because Lafayette is here now. It made people like rethink about how we will remember the revolution. And this is a print that came out, and I really, really love it because you see Lafayette coming then to America, and he is guided by the spirits of the defenders of American liberty. So you see Washington and Franklin, I guess, like in the heavens, or I don't know, like it's just a ghostly figure leading him on here, like telling him go on, yes. So he lays the cornerstone for the Bunker Hill Monument. And it actually helps like fundraise for these things as well, which are still important spots that you can go visit today. And I really love that, because maybe had he not gone and done this, maybe had he not, and had we not had this reckoning in America, these spots might not be preserved in the way they are today. I know Dr. Frawley has taken his sons to many of these places. I've taken my niece and hopefully my daughter, she's 3 now, in a few years, to a lot of these places. And it's still such a moving thing to do with your family, with yourself, with your friends. And I appreciate that. And I think that this was a good moment for this to happen. He's also going to go to Philadelphia, where they recreate this like Arc of Triumph there in Philadelphia. It's being built at the time in Paris. They like make this. And I think about how they like such these grand gestures for him as he goes to these towns. He goes to Independence Hall there, and there was like some rumors that they were thinking about like demolishing and rebuilding. And when he goes there, people are like, oh no, maybe we need to keep this original building. And so when he goes there, he has to shake hands with all these people who are coming, and he is going to be able to then greet and have these really lovely times in all these places. He also stops in Mount Vernon, which of course was George Washington's home. And he goes by himself out to the general's tomb, which is still there today. And he emerges with these tears on his face. He's visibly, he's this, when we think of the 19th century, he's just like a romantic figure. He comes out and he's crying. He's moved by this. He's an emotional man to go and see that. And then he actually then goes and stays with Thomas Jefferson for 10 days at Monticello. And when he left, apparently, Thomas Jefferson had to replenish all of his red wine because they drank so much together every evening. All right. So this is an arduous journey, again, for somebody in his 60s. Particularly, he enjoyed when they would be able to not just have to go by roads. He complains a lot about the jostling on his body in these carriages. But for 10 days, he does go up in the Mississippi. He goes on the Mississippi in a steamboat to St. Louis. And so for 10 days, he really enjoyed that. There's a lovely chef on the cruise that he takes, and he really appreciates like the creature comforts of that there. Then they take a boat over to in Illinois near Shawneetown, and that boat ends up sinking. He was rescued by his son and secretary and spent the night on a mattress in the river. And that was like floating and wet. And so this is not like always an easy go for him in all of these different places. He is, we said this is a time of really a lot of contention. When he stops to make speeches, he avoids, though, anything that's super controversial. He gets that he is a figure that brings people together. One thing that he does speak out on a little bit that's controversial is slavery. Personally, he is anti-slavery. He actually buys this plantation in the West Indies and frees the enslaved workers and pays the workers and tries to show it as like a model of reform. He personally talks to George Washington about freeing his enslaved persons at Mount Vernon. And so he does personally oppose. He does not speak out directly against it in a way, but he does greet a group of Black soldiers who had fought with Andrew Jackson in the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812, personally greeting them, shaking hands to show then his support for this group of people. So when we're thinking about this, what does this event, what does this trip have to do with national unity and identity? And so this had a massive impact on the United States. This is a time where we are full of internal divisions, things like states' rights, things like slavery. And so again, he's this unifying force. And he's also this symbol of the shared sacrifices that everyone had gone through during the revolution, a time of deprivation, a time of trial, both militarily and personally for individuals. And like Jason mentioned, he's arriving at this time, and these both sides come together and, will come to banquets together. And there were those who said, like, if Jackson doesn't win, I'm going to take my sword and, cut up the other view. And then somebody at like a dinner, when he sees like, you're not doing that, he's like, oh, not in front of the good old man here. Yeah. And so like they're coming together. And this really resonates with me and that's what I was asking us at the beginning. Is there a figure that could do this today? Another thing I want to mention too is the hot topic, and I was actually going to ask Dr. Frawley about this at the end, is American exceptionalism. It's like something we can't get away from, right? And this is something, and other professors who are in attendance, Q&A are at the end to talk with us. So there's the belief that the United States is a unique nation, right? Founded on its principles of liberty and democracy and destined to play a special place in the world. So he is both a participant, but also he is an observer, right? He's both a participant and an observer. And he seems to kind of embody this idea, and at least where people reflect this, reminding American of their nation's unique origins and responsibilities. So kind of pivoting now, we'll let that kind of simmer if we think about him helping in many, perhaps at least, thinking about American exceptionalism. We're going to pivot now to these objects that are made. I'm really into souvenir objects from different periods and battles and stuff right now. That's what I'm personally studying. And so I really love seeing the commemorative objects that were made. So this thing called transfer printing, which allowed engraved images to be then put on ceramics and on porcelains. This happened in the mid to late 18th century. So it had been going for a while. A lot of these objects are actually made in England and imported over to America. And so there's like places like Staffordshire are really big producers of ceramics. We think about big companies like Josiah Wedgwood, but there's smaller ones as well that are producing objects like this. And so they're producing what they think Americans want. And then when I look at this, I'm like, yes, I do. I want these pictures. They're amazing. So this is in a range of prices as well. Some of them are really accessible for individuals, and some of them are going to be more expensive, just like objects today, right? Some of them are going to be things that could be worn, and some of them are things, and there's kind of two camps of things that become these like hallowed objects for Lafayette. They could be something that one was wearing or using when you met Lafayette, and then it became symbolic for you personally. And then there's these souvenirs that are made especially to commemorate Lafayette's visit. Herman Melville, if you ever go to the Herman Melville Museum, there's his wife's dress from when she was like 2 years old, and she met Lafayette and shook his hand in it, and the parents preserved like the dress, and it's still on display. If you want to go see the author of Moby Dick's home, it's still on display there. And so there's going to be those kinds of things. And then there's these objects that are made specifically. And so a lot of them are covered in things like fleur-de-lis and then like eagles and stuff to kind of combine like the French and the US things here. One of the most famous examples is the Lafayette pitcher that you see his face on one side and Washington's face on the other. This is a usable object. It's a pitcher. You pour things out of it, right? And this is at the Winter Tour Collections in Delaware. And so there's various symbols of American independence. So we see eagles, we see stars, all of that there. So it is functional, yes, but it's also artistic at the same time. And these then would become these treasured heirlooms that were then passed down. There's this plate here that is going to say General Lafayette, welcome to the land of liberty. And it's going to say he was born in France in 1757, joined the American struggle in 1777, and in 1824 returned to repose in the bosom of the land whose liberty he in part gave birth to. Ooh, that is beautiful, right? I don't know if you'd actually eat off of this or you just want to keep it up and like the nice, I don't know if anyone's grandma still has like the nice china nobody eats, you just look at it. Here's some other ones here. Both of these at the Winter Tour as well. These two plates, one with Washington and Lafayette, the other with just Lafayette crowned with laurels. So this I would say demonstrates his celebrity in the United States, that you would buy these objects, you would have them up in your home. Does anyone still do this kind of stuff? I feel like it's something like my grandmother, like in the curiosity cabinet. I don't really have much of this, but you know, you never know, I guess, watching this. So not just like things like ceramics, there's also wearable objects. This handkerchief here is going to show his image, but also representing his whole journey. So you could hang this up. I guess you could technically wear this as well. And it is showing his arrival at Independence Hall. I really love the gloves. And these are some of the kind of fun stories here with the gloves, because they have his face on them. And if you met Lafayette, many women would put out their hands and he would kiss them. But he famously would decline to kiss his own image when they were wearing a Lafayette glove. And just wait a minute, because if you like these, don't worry, there are some for sale now, but we'll have to wait for that. But these are going to be these gloves with his image. And so these, one is at the Smithsonian and the other is at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. So you see there's one that's kind of a shorter one that's longer, but both with his image. And I don't know if he actually did refuse to, but he would famously like at least be like, oh, that's like, I don't wish to kiss my own face, at least. And so they're showing their patriotism and also then their connection to Lafayette and to his visit. There's a lot of ribbons with his face on them as well. I think this one is from the Smithsonian as well here. And then even men could get in on the action with this lovely cravat from the Winter Tour collection in there we go. This is a cravat for a man tour with Lafayette's face and his name and everything. So if you're a gentleman, you could wear this around. So women could be wearing their gloves, they could be wearing the ribbons, men could be wearing the cravat. Everyone can get in on this Lafayette kind of mania for a bit. And so, and then you could even have little objects for your home, like this pin cushion that had Adams and Jefferson and Lafayette. And at the time, it says like the last three giants of the Revolution that are still alive. And unfortunately, of course, Adams and Jefferson will famously die on the same day. And so, but yet it's at the time they were still alive there. Together, they labored for their country. Oh, I guess this is right after they passed together. They have gone to meet their reward. So that this kind of Lafayette with symbolism will still stay around, that Lafayette will be on one side, and then our last three giants who will unfortunately not be long with the world there. So this shows the impact he had on the American people. And these are items of appreciation, yes, but they're expressions of now a shared history. And as historians, sometimes we need distance from an event to be able to analyze and appreciate it. And 50 years is kind of this good amount of time then for individuals to start being able to look and reflect back then on this revolutionary moment. What did this mean for America? And how will we remember it? How will we commemorate it? How will we write about it? All of these are things that they're thinking about. And Lafayette's visit will help do this. This is just a napkin from one of the balls that, again, it's kind of a lovely napkin, right? That people then kept and are part of the collection. This was at Cornell Library. So now there's also wearable things. There's these mementos that you could get, snuff boxes. You could get medallions. You could get necklaces. You could get rings. All of these with Lafayette's face on them, and keep them forever to show your connection then with this event and remind everyone that you either saw him or at least you were around when this happened. There's so many of these objects, and some collections are doing exhibits right now because, like I said, it's the Bicentennial. And so the Lafayette College in Pennsylvania right now is doing this exhibit and showing some of the things. It's an acrostic poem, each line a letter of Lafayette's name on display, keepsakes for the home, things like this mirror and this snuff box, all part of this exhibit now. So if you find yourself in Pennsylvania in the next few days, you could go or months and go see it. There's also a lot of just regular, just fun events that are going on as well with this bicentennial tour. If you look up Lafayette200.org, you can see if there's any events near you. Unfortunately, Texas was not on the list of things with official, but you never know. Maybe if if you hired a Lafayette impersonator, they could come. But I've been seeing these events popping up in different places, and there's these reenactors who will come and give talks about things that happen. And there's still the American Friends of Lafayette who are trying to keep his memory alive. And you can see this on the next page. There's all the different 2 days that he would stop at these places and encouraging everyone to do these bicentennial events at these days. So these are happening right now. You're probably wondering now, how does this connect with Constitution Day at all? And I do think that this is important, though, because, like I said, it causes individuals, it causes Americans to think about their own place in the world, but also to think about what the revolution was all about. What did the ideals mean? And how did those then get enshrined in our Constitution? He's visiting at a time where the Constitution is still relatively young. It's only 37 years old at the time. And his visit is serving as a bridge, I would say, between the revolutionary ideals that inspired the nation and the ongoing efforts to realize those in a greater and expanding nation. And so with this, then, and understanding his importance as a man of unity, he does things like he's the first foreigner to ever address a joint session of Congress. And he is going to really always talk about things like the importance of liberty, the rule of law, the principles of representative governments. And all these are the core values of our Constitution. And his words and presence reminded Americans of the significance of that. So again, this is a time where, maybe people might have thought like maybe we should break apart in 1824. And he's reminding people, no, we're stronger together. We're stronger together as a nation. And so he can maybe even be seen as an early celebration of the Constitution and the democratic ideals that it represents, and reaffirming our commitment to those ideals, and a reminder of the shared history that everybody has, no matter what kind of place you are, if you're supporting John Quincy Adams, you're supporting Andrew Jackson, we have a shared history, we have a shared value that's binding the nation together. And I would say it's still felt today. This is still felt today. Yes, as a legacy. And it made a lasting impression. 6-year-old Walt Whitman met Lafayette when he came on his tour, and he never forgot it. He always remembered it together forever for his whole life. And it showed the ideals that we're not just a new nation, but we're a nation with maybe a mission. And this continues on in the fact that Lafayette is the name of over 600 towns, cities, rivers in the United States still today. I was telling one of my dear friends I was like, I'm doing a talk about Lafayette for the Constitution Day. And she's like, does he have any connection with Lafayette, Louisiana? And I was like, you know what? He does. These towns are named after him. So he returns home after this huge trip, and he is armed with mementos and gifts from well-wishers. He also is going to be armed from Congress with a gift of $200,000, which is worth more than $4 million today, and 24,000 acres of public land in northern Florida that he is going to sell. And it now forms a lot of the city of Tallahassee. And that's going to help with all of those things that I said, make sure that he was able to care for his family in his older years. Americans would go and visit him throughout the rest of his life. And so he became, he's this American kind of figure in France for people to go and see. So he is going to leave behind a wave of nationalism and patriotic pride and a sense of national unity that doesn't fracture until 36 years later, if you will. I'm thinking math here, when the Civil War is going to begin. When he passes away in 1834, he did not see liberty triumph in his own homeland, but soil from Bunker Hill, from when he first dug for the breaking of the Bunker Hill Monument, it's actually sprinkled on his grave in Paris. And so that symbolizes his American connection. And these are my photos here from the grave in Paris. I too made a pilgrimage to go see his final resting spot. And there's the American flags that are flying there, along with French flags as well. And there's this famous story, again, perhaps apocryphal, of the men in 1917 from the American Expeditionary Force during World War I making that pilgrimage and saying and feeling quite emotional when doing it, and kind of symbolizing that connection then and that enduring legacy between the United States and Lafayette. And like the Americans, I uttered, Lafayette, I am here, when I visited. So thank you all. I hope you learned a little bit more. If you want to know more about these weird objects or anything, please email me. I'd love to chat with you about them. And I'm really looking forward to the Q&A after we hear more from our next speaker.
And Professor Zachary, I'll just let you forward when I say next slide, since I only have two and they're very short. So I wanted to first say, again, happy Constitution Day, but also happy National Voter Registration Day. The two coincide together today on September 17th. So I'm going to cover just how to register to vote very quickly and some important dates you may want to know. So October 7th, 2024 is the last day to register to vote if you want to participate in the November 5th, 2024 general election. So that's the big election coming up. You can early vote if you want from October 21st through November 1st. That's the early voting period window. If you miss voting during early voting, you can still vote on Election Day, which is November 5th. So the official election site is votetexas.gov. It's also managed by the Texas Secretary of State. So you'll find voting information on the Texas Secretary of State site as well. But votetexas.gov is the official site for voting information in Texas. And once you're on that site, you can click on a link titled Register to Vote and choose information on how to vote. You can pick up ballots for registration applications, I should say, in person, usually at courthouses, public libraries, but on the site there's a list of that information. You can request a registration application by mail if you would like, or you can go online, fill it out, print it, sign it, and mail it yourself. So there's three options for that. The Vote Texas site I also wanted to mention really quick is the site where you can check to see if you're currently registered to vote and if that registration is still active, or if you need to update it anyway. Say you have a name change, got married, changed your name in some way, you can do that on the site. It also has election dates. It has polling location information. So if you're registered, you need to find out, where do I vote? You can find out your polling location information on this site as well. What IDs do they accept for voting at the actual voting location when you go vote, and much, much more. Military, overseas voters, tons of information on that site. And after I'm done talking, I'll drop a couple links in the chat as well. Next slide. And also too, obviously as the general elections are here, there's the civic responsibility team at Connect campus and also at the district level, and they'll be sending out, I just put a picture of the flyer, but they'll be sending out an official flyer on voting and the general elections and the registration information that I gave, along with a couple of links, I believe, to videos that we've created on how to find your polling location and how to register to vote. And so happy Constitution Day and happy National Voter Registration Day.
Great. Let me start the Q&A by sharing some of the great answers that were there in Q&A, and feel free to add to them. To the question that Dr. Northrop posed about, is there a figure that crosses the divide, brings people together? Some of the fun answers were Beyonce, Dolly Parton, Denzel Washington. My answers were Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes. Not sure if others agree with those.
So I actually Googled just because I was curious, and I don't know if the site, what exactly the site is, yougov.com, but it has a listing of the most popular politicians that are still alive. Because I know, like, Dolly Parton was my answer, because who doesn't love Dolly Parton? But I was looking for politicians, and the most popular politician, according to this thing, is you could break it down by all adults, millennials, Generation X, baby boomers, men, women. But the number one answer is Jimmy Carter. Which I know he was controversial when he was president, but he's not long for this world either. So it's kind of hard to not like him. Yeah. But the number two choice, Arnold Schwarzenegger. So
interesting. But yeah, and I was thinking, like, not even non-politicians. So during dinner, somebody said Taylor Swift and Elon Musk, and I was like, I don't think that I think those are really, people are divided about those individuals as well. So I like the Denzel Washington and Dolly Parton. I feel like I've never met anybody who really was like, oh, I can't stand either of them. No, like, everybody, you're right, everyone does love them. And by the way, I just wanted to can you skip ahead in these slides? I never showed, but you too, I'd say one of the things is about gloves. You too can buy gloves now, about Lafayette gloves now. And I keep going. Sorry, it's all the way at this is my very last slide. And I took a screenshot because I was just Googling. So those are the commemorative ones. Someone asked what they are. Some of them are made out of leather, some of them are silk. And so those are the ones that I've seen. Leather and silk. I'm sure that there's like cotton ones too, but those are the two popular ones. But if you keep going, Carrie, you can buy replica ones now. And they are for sale. So just Google and you're like, man, I've got to get me some Bicentennial silk screen print for $29.50. You can have Lafayette's face on your hands as well. So there you go.
That's great. And I think a big question that was posed is, how true to the past is the musical Hamilton?
I'll take this one. So it obviously is a lot of U.S. history that is going to be condensed into a less than 3-hour musical. And so there are a lot of artistic licenses that are taken in it. So, I mean, for example, there are a lot more children in the Schuyler family than are shown. There is the kind of plays kind of fast and loose with some of the timeline information, condensing some things because of time constraint. When they do consult historians, John Freeman, for the 10 Dual Commandments. They also consult Ron Chernow, who is a renowned author, and to be able to get some of these historical moments correct. But yeah, I mean, it is a work of fiction that is there to kind of help illuminate certain parts of U.S. history.
Great. Thanks for that answer. That could be a great presentation in the future.
Yes. I have when it first came out, I went to the Society of Early Americanists. I had a panel at the American Society for 18th Century Studies, and then I wrote a book called The Hamilton Phenomenon. So you can read more about that. I edited it. So if you want to learn more about Hamilton and historical accuracy, there's also a book called Historians on Hamilton as well. So there's a lot of great stuff out there.
Awesome. Another fun question we got is, any chance that we could return to the model where the second place winner becomes the vice president? I love both of y'all's opinions on that.
No. I don't know. That it was a disaster when we did it, and it would be a disaster if we went back to it. So.
What about a discussion about American exceptionalism?
Well, yeah, it's certainly a trend in American history, like, going back to at least Massachusetts Bay Colony, when John Winthrop delivered his model of Christian charity and declared that the colony he was establishing was going to be a new Israel, like, we're going to be the new chosen people, and that we shall be as a city upon a hill, right? The eyes of the world will be upon us. And it continues through American history with You think of manifest destiny in the 1840s, that, this concept that it is our manifest destiny to overspread the continent, right? In other words, it's our God-given right to do so. Going and back to the model of Christian charity speech, modern presidents from Ronald Reagan to Barack Obama have quoted that sermon. So it's certainly ingrained in American history that American exceptionalism is a thing. I think the difficulty arises when people misinterpret it, because some people look at it and say, America is certainly unique, in that it is founded upon a set of ideas, not by a people group, right? We do not share a common ethnic origin. We are not a tribe of people that founded a country. We are founded upon ideas. But within that very thing is part of the difficulties of the country. It's not that American exceptionalism doesn't necessarily mean America is the best. It just means it is exceptional. It is unique. It is different. Now, some people interpret that to mean my country always right, and other people disparage it by saying my country always wrong. But the idea of American exceptionalism being ingrained in American history is undeniable. And again, there's lots of work done on it, because again, within that lies the difficulty of the country. There's a book by Arthur Schlesinger, who he used to be a liberal. He became a conservative later in life, and he wrote a short book called The Disuniting of America, in which he talks about this issue of, are we a melting pot or not? Is there anything in the absence? Basically, the question he asks in the book is, in the absence of a common ethnic origin, is there anything that unites us as a country? And I'll let you read the book to determine whether you agree with his conclusions or not. But yeah, I don't think you can deny that concept is very much ingrained in our culture.
And it was definitely, I would say, for its importance, at least at the time for Lafayette's visit, it's something that I feel like we don't know a lot of anymore. I feel like it's almost like a footnote. And yet I think for me, it was really moving to see how it helped get people to think about how we're treating veterans at the time. These are revolutionary figures who had fought in the war, just regular soldiers who were getting older at the time. How do we take care of veterans? And a lot of things that I think that we just maybe take for granted now, like the way we think about preserving important battlefields, or these kind of things, are things that Lafayette's trip, I would say, helped have us as a nation discuss how we were going to remember our own history. And I for that, I feel like it's something that we maybe could talk about more. And I was actually really moved by doing the research for this talk and thinking about it more, because as we're, if you're in this thing, you attended our talk this summer where we were talking about the importance of the 250th anniversary of 1774. And so these moments then that we're talking about, it's like remembering those moments 50 years later. It was a great way for me to think about how we think about history and how we preserve things. I'll look at Gina's question now. I'll let Jason and Dr. Frawley tackle that one.
So again, the question, if you can't see it in the chat, is, do any of you feel we are moving away from the ideas set by the Constitution? Again, that's the Constitution, as I've tried to illustrate in my talk, since the beginning, it's been debated. It is a written document, that's another thing that's, I wouldn't say unique, but certainly special about America, is that we value written law, and that we do have a document that we can go to, so that the wool can't necessarily be pulled over our eyes, but there is room for interpretation, right? We still deal with the concept of loose construction versus strict construction. So I don't know that we're moving away from what the Constitution says. Interpretations are changing, and we can adapt the Constitution. One of the questions I get asked all the time by friends of mine is, do you think we should just scrap the Constitution? I even heard Bill Maher say this on TV the other night, like, oh, the Constitution is so old. Shouldn't we just throw it away and start from scratch? And I don't know that I'm on that team. We have the means to amend it and to change it as we see fit. I don't know that. I think it's kind of maybe a little arrogant of modern Americans to think they could do better. But certainly we can amend it and change it to meet the needs of our generations. But I wouldn't say that I don't know that we're moving away from it necessarily. Again, it's up to how you interpret it. So that's kind of a personal question, I guess, on that.
And also, I mean, for me, the people who are writing it and who are debating at the time didn't always agree on how it was going to be
Right.
interpreted, like you said.
Yeah.
And so if we're moving away, some then would have said, yeah, some, so I feel like when I hear people say like we should get back to founding fathers, I want to be like, well, which one,
Right.
because there were at the time several different ways of interpreting, and some of them who were writing and passing and involved are the ones who are doing things like the Alien and Sedition Acts really quickly that we might nowadays might say like, well, that was really stepping away from the idea. So I feel like these are all interesting moments for us to discuss, and there's a lot of different ways of looking at it.
And to that same point, somebody else had asked earlier, what led the anti-federalists to finally get on board with the Federalists? And the answer is that some didn't. I have the numbers here. Each state could set up its own process, elect its own delegates to approve the Constitution during the ratification process, and only Delaware, New Jersey, and Georgia unanimously agreed to the Constitution. All the other states, it was divided, and some of them were pretty close, like Massachusetts only approved the Constitution by a vote of 187 to 168. Rhode Island, only 34 approved, 32 nay, right? So 34 to 32. New York, 30 to 27, right? And so it was a tight decision in some of these states. New Hampshire, 57 to 47. So I think those who did get on board, I think things like the Federalist Papers helped. You have I was going to quote this earlier, but from Federalist 51 by James Madison, he says, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. But clearly we're not all angels, right? But then he goes on to say, if angels were to govern man, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary, right? If we were governed by angels, then we wouldn't have to worry about the government. If we were all angels, we wouldn't need government. But he says, in framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, right? We are fallible as human beings. The great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed. And next, well, my writing gets a little sloppy here, but then next you basically have to oblige the government to control itself, to behave, right? And so things like the Federalist Papers are going to help convince some. Obviously, the Bill of Rights being added, the specific list of things the government can't do to you, that's going to appeal to a lot of the anti-federalists, and they'll get on board. But again, there are some who never will. There's some who are going to be opposed to it even after it's ratified. And I think people like, think of James Monroe, who was an anti-federalist. Well, he becomes president of the United States. So, when your side loses in a political election, whether it be for the Constitution or a political race, well, you can go home and cry about it, or you can play ball. And so people like James Monroe elected to play ball, right? They're gonna get on board with what the law of the land is going to be and play within those parameters.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for coming today, and thank you to people in the future that will watch this recording. Appreciate our presenters as well as people supporting today, like Dr. Cox. Dr. Cox will provide the link for attendance, and we will share that with your professors as well. Thanks to everyone for jumping in on the conversation and asking great questions. That was awesome. Let's see the link. It's right there. Please fill that out. And again, we'll be able to share it out. Have a great Constitution Day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank y'all. Bye. Have a good day.